The pressurized cabin of a first-class flight is a world unto itself. It's a bubble of hushed tones, warm towels, and champagne that costs more than a monthly car payment. It's supposed to be a sanctuary at 30,000 feet, a place where the ugliness of the world below can't reach. But on Ascendair Flight 715, from Los Angeles to New York, that bubble was about to burst. For one 17-year-old boy, the recycled air would soon become thick with accusation and prejudice. And for the crew who judged him by the color of his skin and the brand of his hoodie, they were about to learn a terrifying lesson. Sometimes, the quietest passenger holds all the power. The journey began, as most do, with the mundane choreography of boarding. First-class passengers on Flight 715 were a predictable mix of tailored suits, designer handbags, and the weary, entitled expressions of people who spent more time in the sky than on the ground. Into this polished environment walked Royce Maxwell. At 17, Royce was tall and lanky, with a thoughtful face and deep, observant eyes. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, but not in the spotlight. Today that skin was framed by a simple grey fleece hoodie, worn-in jeans, and a pair of scuffed but clean sneakers. His backpack was a standard black canvas affair, not the leather monogrammed carry-on common in this cabin. He was, by all appearances, utterly unremarkable, and in first class, that made him a target. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Karen Miller, watched him from her post near the galley. Karen had been flying for 25 years. Her smile was professionally lacquered, but her eyes performed a constant, swift calculus of status. She saw Royce and her internal ledger came up short. Wrong cabin, her expression seemed to say. "Can I help you find your seat, sir?" she asked, her voice dripping with a saccharine condescension. She placed a subtle emphasis on the word "sir," as if it were a costume he was trying on. Royce glanced at his boarding pass. "Yes, I'm in 2A. Karen's smile tightened. "Of course you are. Right this way." She gestured towards the window seat in the second row, her movements clipped and efficient. Royce settled in, pulling out a well-worn paperback novel and a set of simple, wired earbuds. He was used to this. He was the son of Lawrence Maxwell, the founder and CEO of Ethelred Capital Group, a private equity behemoth whose portfolio included everything from tech startups to, ironically, Ascendair's parent company, Global Skyways Holdings. But Royce rarely advertised this fact. He preferred to navigate the world on his own terms, to see it without the distorting filter of his father's wealth. Flights like these were a social experiment, a stark reminder of how quickly people judged a book by its cover. As the other passengers settled, Karen's junior partner, a nervous, eager-to-please flight attendant named Brenda Walsh, came by to offer pre-departure beverages. She served the man in 2B, a slick-looking man in his 40s with a loud voice and an expensive watch, a glass of champagne with a flourish. When she got to Royce, her smile faltered. "Anything for you?" she asked, her tone hesitant, as if she expected him to ask for something difficult. "Just a water, please." "No ice," Royce said, not looking up from his book. Brenda scurried away, returning with the water. The contrast in service was not lost on Royce, but he said nothing. He simply wanted to get to New York to visit his grandmother. He put his earbuds in, turned on a lo-fi playlist, and closed his eyes, hoping to disappear for the next 5 hours. Across the aisle, the man in 2B, whose name was Chad Peterson, was making a show of arranging his belongings. He was a VP of sales for some mid-level software company, and he played the part with gusto, speaking loudly into his phone about synergizing deliverables until the very last second before the cabin door was closed. He conspicuously placed a pair of brand-new silver Bose 700 noise-cancelling headphones on the small console between his seat and the aisle. Karen Miller passed by, pausing to offer Peterson another glass of champagne. "Mr. Peterson, so good to have you back with us," she said, her voice warm and genuine. She had recognized him from previous flights. He was a somebody. "Always a pleasure, Karen," he boomed, giving her a familiar smile. His eyes flickered over to Royce, a brief, dismissive glance that took in the hoodie and the cheap earbuds. He scoffed under his breath and turned back to his screen. The plane took off, a smooth, powerful ascent into the California sky. Below, the sprawling lights of Los Angeles faded into a glittering carpet. Inside the climate-controlled tube, a quiet drama was already taking shape. The lines had been drawn, the judgments made. All it needed was a spark to ignite the fire. An hour into the flight, the cabin was settled into a comfortable rhythm. The clink of cutlery from the meal service had subsided. The lights were dimmed, and most passengers were either sleeping or lost in their screens. Royce was engrossed in his book, the soft, instrumental music from his earbuds, a pleasant barrier against the drone of the engines. The calm was shattered by Chad Peterson's voice, sharp and accusatory. Excuse me, flight attendant." Karen Miller was there in an instant, her face a mask of concern. "Yes, Mr. Peterson? Is everything all right?" "No, it's not all right," he said, his voice rising in volume, ensuring everyone in the front cabin could hear. "My headphones. My Bose headphones. They're gone." He was patting down his seat, the console, the pocket in front of him, with exaggerated, frantic motions. "They were right here on the console before I went to the lavatory 10 minutes ago. Now they're gone." Karen's professional demeanor shifted into one of high alert. "Are you certain, sir? Perhaps they slipped down the side of your seat." "I'm not an idiot, Karen," Peterson snapped. "I've looked everywhere. They were worth over $400. Someone took them." His eyes, deliberately and immediately, darted across the aisle and landed on Royce. It wasn't a subtle glance. It was a pointed, unwavering stare. Every head in the cabin slowly turned to follow his gaze. Royce felt the weight of their eyes like a physical pressure. He slowly pulled out his earbuds, the sudden silence of the cabin roaring in his ears. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm. Karen Miller walked over and stood in the aisle next to Royce's seat, her arms crossed. Her earlier condescension had now curdled into open suspicion. "Sir," she began, her voice cold and official, "the gentleman across the aisle is missing a pair of expensive headphones. They disappeared while he was away from his seat. You were sitting right here the entire time." The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It wasn't a question, it was an indictment. Royce's stomach tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Okay. And?" Peterson chimed in from his seat, his voice laced with venom. "You're the only one who didn't get up. I saw you, just sitting there with your hood up." It was a lie. Royce's hood was down, but the image was planted. The quiet, hooded black kid in a sea of wealthy white faces. The narrative wrote itself. "I was reading," Royce said, holding up his paperback. "I didn't see anything." "Or you saw an opportunity," Peterson shot back. Brenda Walsh had now joined Karen, standing behind her like a nervous shadow. She wrung her hands, her eyes flitting between her superior, the angry passenger, and the accused teenager. "Sir," Karen said to Royce, her voice taking on the unyielding tone of someone who had already reached a verdict. "We need to resolve this. Would you mind if we took a look in your backpack?" Royce felt a surge of indignation. It was happening again. The assumptions, the instant judgment. He had two choices: create a scene and demand his rights, or comply and prove his innocence, hoping the humiliation would be brief. He chose the latter. believing in the simple power of the truth. "Be my guest," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He reached down, pulled his backpack from under the seat in front of him, and placed it on his lap. "There's nothing in there but a book, a sweatshirt, and a laptop." He unzipped the main compartment. Karen leaned over, her expression one of grim determination. Peterson craned his neck, a smug look on his face, certain of his victory. The other passengers were now openly staring, some even pulling out their phones, their screens glowing in the dim cabin light. They were no longer passengers on a flight. They were the audience at a public shaming. Karen began to rifle through his belongings, her touch rough and invasive. She pulled out his spare sweatshirt, a history textbook, his laptop charger. No headphones. She checked the side pockets, the front pouch. Nothing but a pen, a charging cable for his phone, and a pack of gum. Her face, for a moment, registered a flicker of disappointment. "See?" "Nothing," Royce said, the edge in his voice now unmistakable. But Peterson wasn't giving up. He probably stashed them on him. "Check his pockets. That big hoodie has a lot of places to hide things." The demand was outrageous, a complete violation. Royce looked at Karen, expecting her to draw a line, to say this had gone too far. Instead, she straightened up, her jaw set. "Sir, if you want this to be over with quickly, I suggest you cooperate." The fire in Royce's stomach turned to ice. They were actually going to do this. They were going to physically search him, here, in the middle of a first-class cabin, in front of a dozen strangers, based on nothing more than the word of an angry man and the color of his skin. "This is ridiculous," Royce said, his voice low. "What's ridiculous?" Karen countered, her voice rising. "Is theft on an airplane. It's a federal offense. We can have the captain call ahead, have authorities meet us at the gate, or you can just stand up, empty your pockets, and we can all move on with our flight." It was a threat wrapped in a choice, a coerced surrender. The world had shrunk to the space of his seat, the accusing eyes of the crew and the silent judgment of the passengers. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that this was about to get much, much worse. The air in the cabin was thick with tension. The low hum of the engines seemed to amplify the silence that had fallen over the first-class section. Royce looked from Karen's resolute face to Brenda's nervous one, and then to the other passengers. No one spoke up for him. They were either complicit in their silence or too afraid to intervene. They were spectators. "Fine," Royce said, his voice barely a whisper. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up in the narrow space, his 6'2" frame making the aisle feel even more claustrophobic. "The captain needs to be made aware," Karen said to Brenda, not taking her eyes off Royce. It was a power play, a way to formalize the proceeding and add another layer of authority and intimidation. Brenda nodded meekly and disappeared towards the cockpit. A minute later, she returned, followed by Captain Robert Davies. The captain was a man in his late 50s with a neat, graying moustache and an air of weary command. He looked at the scene, the standing teenager, the accusatory passenger, the grim-faced flight attendant, and sighed internally. It was a customer service issue, a messy one, and he wanted it resolved with minimal paperwork. "What's the situation here, Karen?" he asked, his voice a low baritone meant to project control. "Mr. Peterson in 2B reported his noise-cancelling headphones stolen," Karen explained crisply. "The passenger in 2A was the only person in the immediate vicinity who did not leave his seat. We've searched his bag with his permission and found nothing. The reporting passenger believes the item may be on his person." Captain Davies looked at Royce. It was a cursory, evaluative glance. He saw a kid in a hoodie. He saw a first-class cabin. He saw an equation that, in his experience, often resulted in trouble. His primary duty was to his crew and the smooth operation of his flight. De-escalation was key, and the path of least resistance was to support his lead attendant. "Son," the captain said, his tone paternalistic but firm, "we don't want any trouble here. Why don't you just turn out your pockets so we can put this matter to rest?" Royce felt a profound sense of isolation. Even the captain, the ultimate authority on the plane, had already sided with them. To resist now would be to confirm their suspicions, to be labeled as difficult or aggressive. With a slow, deliberate motion, he pulled the contents from his jeans pockets, his phone, a worn leather wallet, and a single key. He placed them on his seat. "There," he said. Peterson scoffed. "The hoodie. It's in the hoodie pocket." Royce looked down at the large kangaroo pocket on the front of his fleece. With a deep breath, he reached in and turned it inside out. It was empty. A collective, faint sigh of disappointment seemed to ripple through the cabin. The show was not yielding the dramatic climax they had anticipated. Karen Miller, however, was not finished. Her credibility was on the line. "We need to be thorough," she said. Her eyes narrowed. She took a step forward. "Sir, I need you to lift your arms." It was no longer a request. It was an order. Royce stared at her, his mind racing. He was being treated like a criminal. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to shout, to protest this gross violation. But he thought of his father's words, a lesson instilled in him from a young age. In a moment of crisis, never let them see you lose your composure. Anger is a weapon they will use against you. Clarity is a shield they can never penetrate. He slowly raised his arms. Karen, with a grim sense of duty, began to pat down the sides of his torso and the outside of his legs. It was a clumsy, unprofessional search, but the humiliation was expert level. It was a public branding, a declaration that he was untrustworthy, that he did not belong. He could feel the phone cameras on him, recording his debasement for future retweets and shares. She found nothing. Of course, she found nothing. She stepped back, her face a mixture of frustration and confusion. The narrative she had constructed in her head had crumbled. There was no stolen item, no satisfying gotcha moment. There was just a teenager she had publicly humiliated for no reason. And then, as if on cue, came the twist. Chad Peterson let out a small, theatrical gasp. "Oh, my God," he said, his voice suddenly sheepish. He was rummaging in his own laptop bag, which had been at his feet the entire time. He pulled out the sleek, silver Bose 700s. "Well, what do you know? They must have been in my side pocket the whole time. I never even thought to look there. Silly me." The apology was so flimsy, so transparently false, it was an insult in itself. He didn't make eye contact with Royce. He directed his performance to Karen and the captain. "So sorry for the misunderstanding," he said with a weak chuckle. "My mistake. All this travel, you know. My head gets scrambled." The tension in the cabin didn't dissipate. It transformed into a thick, awkward embarrassment. The accusers were now left standing in the aisle, their certainty exposed as baseless prejudice. Captain Davies cleared his throat. "Well then, glad we could resolve that." He gave Royce a curt nod. "Our apologies for the disturbance, young man." Karen Miller's apology was even worse. "Sorry for the mix-up," she mumbled, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere over Royce's shoulder. She couldn't bring herself to look at him. She and Brenda quickly retreated to the galley. The captain returned to the cockpit. The show was over. Royce sank back into his seat, his body trembling with a quiet, controlled rage. He could feel the other passengers' gazes on him now, a mixture of pity and discomfort. They put their phones away, suddenly ashamed to have been part of it. The man who had been filming across the aisle quietly deleted the video. The humiliation was complete. But as the plane continued its journey through the dark sky, Royce reached for his phone. He didn't text a friend or a family member to vent. He opened a secure messaging app and typed a single, cryptic message to a contact labeled DC. Incident on AA715, code red. Need full executive reception at JFK Gate B28. No authorities, just us. He hit send. The message was delivered instantly. A moment later, 2 blue check marks appeared. The message had been read. The crew of Ascend Air Flight 715 thought the incident was over. They had no idea it was just beginning. The karma that was coming for them wasn't going to be a gentle correction. It was going to be a corporate tsunami. For the remaining 3 hours of the flight, a fragile and uncomfortable peace settled over the first-class cabin. Karen and Brenda avoided aisle 2 entirely, sending another flight attendant to cater to the passengers there. Chad Peterson put on his newly discovered headphones and pretended to be asleep, hiding from the consequences of his actions. The other passengers kept to themselves, wrapped in a collective blanket of awkwardness. Royce didn't read his book. He couldn't focus. He stared out the window at the dark, cloud-strewn expanse, his mind replaying the events in a painful loop. The suspicion in Karen's eyes, the captain's dismissive tone, the feeling of her hands patting him down, the shame, the anger. It wasn't the first time he had faced prejudice, but it was the most public, the most visceral. He felt a cold resolve solidifying within him. This wasn't just about a stolen headphone that wasn't stolen. It was about the abuse of authority, the casual bigotry that festered in the cracks of polite society. The first signs of dawn were breaking over the horizon as the plane began its descent into New York City. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their imminent arrival at John F. Kennedy International Airport. He thanked them for flying Ascend Air. The irony was not lost on Royce. As the plane taxied to Gate B28, the usual flurry of activity began. Seatbelts were unbuckled, bags were pulled from overhead bins, and people crowded the aisle, eager to deplane. Royce, however, remained seated. He watched Peterson scurry out of his seat and disappear down the jet bridge without a backward glance. He watched the other passengers leave, their eyes studiously avoiding his. Karen and Brenda stood at the front of the plane, forcing their professional smiles as they bid farewell. When the cabin was nearly empty, Karen noticed Royce was still in his seat. "Sir, we've arrived. You're free to deplane," she said, her voice strained. "I'm waiting for someone," Royce replied calmly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since the incident. There was no anger in his gaze, just a profound, unnerving stillness. It made her skin crawl. She exchanged a nervous look with Brenda and shrugged, turning her attention back to her post-flight duties. Finally, when every other passenger was gone, Royce stood up, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and walked slowly towards the open door. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, he was met not with the usual bustle of an airport terminal, but with a silent, waiting phalanx of people. There were 4 of them. 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed in immaculate dark suits. They stood with the quiet, imposing stillness of Secret Service agents. At their front stood a man in his 50s, with sharp, intelligent features and silver-streaked hair. This was David Chen, the chief operating officer of Ethelred Capital Group and his father's most trusted advisor. And standing next to him, his face a mask of cold fury, was Lawrence Maxwell. Lawrence was not a physically imposing man, but he possessed an aura of such intense power and authority that he seemed to command the very air around him. He was a ghost in the corporate world, rarely photographed, never interviewed. but his name was whispered with a mixture of fear and awe in boardrooms across the globe. Captain Davies was the first to emerge from the cockpit to hand off the flight manifest. He saw the assembly of suits and stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes widened in disbelief. He had only seen the CEO in a grainy photo on the company's internal website, but there was no mistaking him. It was Lawrence Maxwell. Karen and Brenda, tidying up the galley, heard the silence and poked their heads out. Karen's smile froze on her face. Her blood ran cold. She saw the most powerful man in the entire aviation industry standing 10 feet away from her. And then she saw him place a protective hand on the shoulder of the boy she had just humiliated. In that instant, the entire universe reconfigured itself. The insignificant kid in the hoodie was not an outsider who had slipped through the cracks. He was the heir to the entire kingdom. He was Royce Maxwell. Lawrence's eyes, as cold and grey as a winter storm, swept over the crew. They landed on Captain Davies, then Karen, then Brenda. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The chilling quiet of his anger was more terrifying than any shout. "Captain Davies," Lawrence said, his voice low and lethally precise. David Chen stepped forward and handed the captain a business card. "I am Lawrence Maxwell. This is my son." Captain Davies looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His face went pale, a slick sheen of sweat instantly appearing on his brow. Mr. Maxwell, sir, I had no idea." "That," Lawrence replied, his voice dropping another degree, "is precisely the problem. You had no idea, yet you and your crew appointed yourselves judge, jury, and executioner over a child on your aircraft. My child." He took a step forward, and the crew instinctively took a step back. "My son informed me of an incident on this flight," Lawrence continued, "a false accusation of theft, a public search, a gross abuse of authority. Tell me, Captain, is this the standard of service now offered by Ascend Air?" Karen Miller found her voice, though it was a weak, trembling thing. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding. The other passenger, he was mistaken. We apologized." Lawrence's gaze snapped to her. It was like being pinned by a laser. "An apology? You think an apology erases the humiliation you inflicted? You think a mumbled sorry is sufficient restitution for treating my son like a common criminal in front of a plane full of people?" He turned to David Chen. "David, their names. Karen Miller, lead flight attendant. Brenda Walsh, flight attendant. Captain Robert Davies," Chen recited from a tablet that had seemingly appeared in his hand. "All service records and complaint histories are being pulled as we speak." Lawrence Maxwell looked back at the three of them. The faint, practiced smile was long gone from Karen's face, replaced by a mask of pure terror. Brenda was openly crying. Captain Davies looked like he was about to be physically ill. "As of this moment," Lawrence announced, his voice echoing in the confined space of the jet bridge, "all three of you are suspended from duty, pending a full investigation. Your company credentials and airport access badges will be surrendered now." One of the men in suits stepped forward, holding an open pouch. He didn't speak. He just waited. The hard, cold reality slammed into them. This wasn't a reprimand. This was an exorcism. The ground had opened up beneath their feet, and they were falling. And they knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that they had not yet hit the bottom. The jet bridge at Gate B-28 became a silent, sterile chamber of judgment. For the three crew members, it felt like the air had been sucked out, replaced by the crushing weight of their careers, imploding in real time. Captain Davies, fumbling with trembling hands, unclipped the ID badge from his pilot's uniform. The plastic card, which for 30 years had been a symbol of his authority and expertise, now felt like a shackle. He dropped it into the waiting pouch held by the stone-faced man in the suit. His career, his pride, his very identity as a captain, all gone in that single, ignominious motion. Karen Miller was next. The confident, authoritative woman who had commanded the cabin just hours before had vanished. In her place was a shaking, terrified, middle-aged woman on the verge of collapse. "Please, Mr. Maxwell," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I have a mortgage. I've given my life to this airline." Lawrence Maxwell's expression remained unchanged, a granite cliff unmoved by her desperate plea. "You gave your life to this airline," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "And in return, you were entrusted with its reputation, with the safety and dignity of its passengers. You betrayed that trust. You used the uniform this company gave you as a weapon to bully a teenager because you didn't like his clothes. Your mortgage is not my concern. The culture of my company is." She surrendered her badge, her hand shaking so violently that it clattered against the other IDs in the pouch. Brenda Walsh, through a veil of tears, simply handed hers over without a word. She was young, her career barely started, and she knew it was already over. She had followed a bad leader, and now she was paying the price. David Chen spoke into a discreet communications device on his wrist. "Security has been notified. They are to be escorted from the premises immediately. They are not to access any company property. Their lockers will be cleared and the contents shipped to their homes." It was a cold, ruthlessly efficient dismantling of their professional lives. Just as the crew was about to be led away, the final piece of the puzzle emerged from the jet bridge. Chad Peterson. He had been loitering in the terminal, perhaps morbidly curious about the hold-up. He saw the scene, the men in suits, the distraught crew, and the teenager standing next to a man who radiated terrifying power, and he immediately understood he had made a catastrophic error. He tried to turn, to blend into the stream of travelers, but it was too late. "Mr. Peterson!" Lawrence Maxwell's voice cut through the air, stopping him in his tracks. Peterson turned slowly, a sickly, forced smile plastered on his face. "Yes? Do I know you?" David Chen stepped forward, holding his tablet. "Chad Peterson, Vice President of Regional Sales for Syntech Solutions. Your company, Mr. Peterson, is currently in the 3rd round of negotiations to become a primary software vendor for 3 subsidiaries of the Ethelred Capital Group, a contract valued at approximately $8 million annually." The color drained from Peterson's face. The name Ethelred Capital Group hit him like a physical blow. He connected the dots with blinding, horrifying speed. "Furthermore," Chen continued, his tone clinical, "our legal team, represented here by Ms. Albright," he gestured to the woman in the suit, "has reviewed the passenger footage of the incident, which another first-class passenger has already forwarded to our corporate office. Your actions constitute slander and defamation, and the filing of a false report to the flight captain. We will be pursuing a civil suit for damages. The full force of my firm's legal resources will be brought to bear." Ms. Albright, the lawyer, stepped forward and handed Peterson a crisp envelope. "You've been served, Mr. Peterson. I'd advise you to retain counsel. A copy of this is also being sent to your CEO at Syntech, Mr. Gerald Finney. I believe Mr. Maxwell serves on the advisory board of the venture capital firm that holds a majority stake in your company." It was a perfectly executed corporate decapitation. In the span of 90 seconds, Lawrence Maxwell and his team had not only threatened Peterson's career and personal finances, but had also drawn a direct line to his own CEO, ensuring maximum professional devastation. Peterson looked at Royce, then at Lawrence. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. "It was a mistake, an honest mistake. I apologized." "You didn't apologize to my son," Lawrence said, his voice flat. "You offered a flippant excuse to the crew to save your own skin. You saw a black kid in first class and you saw a target. You saw an easy scapegoat. You were wrong." He turned his back on Peterson, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. "David, ensure the initial complaint in the lawsuit is filed before lunch, and cancel the Syntec negotiations. Permanently. I want a press release issued to all major financial news outlets by market open tomorrow, stating that Ethelred and its subsidiaries have severed all current and future ties with Syntec Solutions due to a fundamental misalignment of corporate values and ethics." With that, Lawrence Maxwell put his arm around his son's shoulders and guided him towards the terminal, leaving his team to manage the wreckage. The crew was led away by airport security, their faces pale with shock. Chad Peterson stood frozen in place, clutching the lawsuit summons, the architect of his own ruin. The immediate fallout was swift and brutal, but it was only the beginning. The deeper karma, the methodical and systemic consequences of their actions, was yet to come. And it would be far, far worse than a simple firing. In the sterile, glass-walled headquarters of Ethelred Capital Group in Manhattan, the aftermath of Flight 715 was not treated as a mere customer service complaint. It was treated as a systemic failure, a cancer that had to be carved out with surgical precision. Lawrence Maxwell was not a man who believed in half measures. His response was designed not just to punish, but to serve as a permanent, terrifying lesson to every employee in his vast corporate empire. The fate of Karen Miller. Karen's suspension quickly became a termination for gross misconduct. The internal investigation, led by David Chen's office, was mercilessly thorough. They didn't just focus on the incident with Royce, they unearthed a pattern. Using keyword data mining on years of post-flight reports and customer feedback emails, they flagged a dozen other complaints filed against her. Complaints from minority passengers, from non-native English speakers, from people in economy class who had been treated with disdain. Each complaint, on its own, had been dismissed by middle management as a one-off or an unsubstantiated claim. But compiled together, they painted a damning portrait of a woman who routinely abused her authority based on prejudice. She was fired without severance. But the true blow came next. Ethelred's legal team compiled the dossier and formally submitted it to the Federal Aviation Administration, along with a high-resolution copy of the video from the flight, which they had obtained from the passenger. They petitioned the FAA to review her flight attendant certification, citing a pattern of behavior that compromised passenger safety and dignity, arguing that her discriminatory conduct created a hostile environment that could escalate into a safety issue. 6 months later, after a lengthy review, the FAA agreed. Karen Miller's license was suspended indefinitely. She was blacklisted. Every time she applied for a job at another airline, even a budget carrier, her file would be flagged. The name Karen Miller became synonymous with liability. She tried to sue for wrongful termination, but Ethelred's army of lawyers buried her in motions and discovery requests until her savings ran out, and she was forced to drop the suit. The woman who had built her identity around her seniority and uniform was now unemployable in the only industry she had ever known. She ended up taking a job as a cashier at a suburban big-box store. The crisp blue of her new work vest, a constant, bitter reminder of the Ascend Air uniform she had lost forever. The path of Brenda Walsh. Brenda's situation was handled differently. During her investigative interview, she broke down completely. Sobbing, she confessed that she had felt uncomfortable from the beginning, that she knew Karen's targeting of Royce was wrong, but she was new, intimidated, and terrified of being disciplined by her senior officer. She provided a detailed, corroborating statement about Karen's long-standing biases, mentioning other incidents she had witnessed. Lawrence Maxwell reviewed her file and her testimony. He saw a follower, not a leader. A coward, but perhaps not a lost cause. She was still fired from Ascend Air. Her failure to intervene was a fireable offense in itself. There had to be accountability. However, she was not blacklisted. As part of her separation agreement, a unique clause was added. If she completed 500 hours of volunteer work with a non-profit dedicated to fighting racial injustice, like the NAACP or the Innocence Project, and underwent a rigorous anti-bias and conflict resolution training program at Ethelred's expense, the gross misconduct mark on her permanent record would be amended to voluntary resignation. It was a chance at redemption. Brenda took it. A year later, she was working for a small regional airline. She was quieter, more thoughtful, and quick to speak up if she saw any passenger being treated unfairly. The trauma of Flight 715 had become the defining lesson of her life. The reckoning of Captain Robert Davies. Captain Davies's fate was a study in corporate humiliation. He was a veteran pilot with a spotless flight record. He argued that he had followed procedure, backing his crew in a passenger dispute. Lawrence Maxwell's response was cutting. "Your procedure," he said during the final review board, "is to de-escalate, to protect all passengers, not to enable the prejudice of your crew. Your failure was not of procedure, but of character. You took the easy path, and in doing so, you became complicit." He wasn't fired. Firing a pilot with his experience was difficult and costly. Instead, he was made into an example. He was formally stripped of his captain rank, a public demotion that sent shockwaves through the pilot community. He was reassigned as a first officer, forced to sit in the right-hand seat and take orders from pilots who were once his juniors. He was also required to fly with a supervising captain for a full year and lead quarterly anti-bias and de-escalation training seminars for new pilots, where he was forced to use the recording of the Flight 715 incident and his own failure as the primary case study. For a man whose entire identity was built on his 4-stripe epaulets and the title of captain, the punishment was a fate worse than termination. It was a daily, public reminder of his greatest failure, the complete annihilation of Chad Peterson. For Chad Peterson, the karma was not just hard, it was apocalyptic. As promised, the press release from Ethelred Capital Group hit the wires at 8:30 a.m. the next morning. It was a bombshell. Ethelred was not just a potential client for Syntec, it was a bellwether. When Ethelred blacklisted a company for ethical failures, the rest of Wall Street paid attention. By noon, Syntec's stock had plummeted 28%. Their CEO, Gerald Finney, who had indeed received a personal call from Lawrence Maxwell, was in full-blown panic mode. Peterson was fired before he even had time to find a lawyer, his termination effective immediately, for conduct detrimental to the company's reputation and shareholder value. But Lawrence Maxwell wasn't done. Ethelred Capital had a long memory and an even longer reach. They discovered that Peterson's wife ran a high-end event planning business. A quick review showed that her 3 largest clients were all portfolio companies of Ethelred. Within a week, all 3 clients cancelled their contracts, citing unforeseen budgetary restructuring. The civil lawsuit proceeded, faced with a mountain of evidence, including the video and testimony from other passengers. Peterson's lawyers advised him to settle. The settlement was brutal. A public, written apology to Royce Maxwell, published in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and a substantial 7-figure donation to a charitable foundation, chosen by Royce, that provided legal aid to minority youths who had been falsely accused of crimes. Peterson was ruined. Professionally, he was toxic. Financially, he was crippled by the settlement. Socially, he was a pariah. The $400 headphones he had so arrogantly accused a teenager of stealing had cost him his career, his reputation, and millions of dollars. He had tried to punch down at who he thought was a nobody, and had instead struck the foundations of a skyscraper, bringing the entire structure down upon himself. The days following Flight 715 unfolded in the hushed tranquility of Lawrence Maxwell's estate in upstate New York. It was a world away from the recycled air of a jet cabin or the sterile canyons of Wall Street. Here, ancient oaks blazed in autumn colors, their fiery leaves blanketing the manicured lawns in a carpet of gold and crimson. For Royce, it was a familiar sanctuary, but for the first time, the quiet felt different. It wasn't just peaceful. It was a space to process, to let the coiled anger and shame inside him finally begin to unwind. He and his father fell into a new rhythm, marked by long, silent walks through the woods, and evenings spent not in front of a television, but before a crackling fireplace. The unspoken tension of the event lingered between them. Lawrence's fury, once a directed weapon at the jet bridge, had cooled into a simmering, protective rage. "You'll fly private from now on," he stated one crisp afternoon as they sat by the edge of a glassy, silent lake. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decree. "I'll have the Gulf Stream ready for you. No more commercial flights. No more dealing with that." Royce stared at the water, watching a single red leaf drift across its surface. This was the response he expected, the fortress being reinforced, the walls built higher. It was an act of love, he knew, but it felt like a sentence. "No," Royce said softly, his voice clear in the still air. Lawrence turned to him, his brow furrowed. "Royce, what you went through was unacceptable. I can protect you from that." "Let me." "That's the problem, Dad," Royce said, finally turning to meet his father's gaze. His eyes were clear, holding a depth of weary understanding that belied his 17 years. "You've spent my whole life protecting me, and I'm grateful for it. But your protection is a filter. I don't want to live in your world." "Not completely." He saw the confusion on his father's face and pushed on, the words he had held inside for years finally spilling out. "Your world is tailored. People smile at you because you're Lawrence Maxwell. Waiters rush to your table. Doors that are closed to everyone else swing open for you. When people meet me and find out who I am, they change. Their posture changes. Their voice changes. I cease to be Royce, and I become Maxwell's son. It's like being a ghost in my own life." He paused, taking a breath. "That's why I wear the hoodie and fly commercial. I want to know what the real world is like when my last name isn't in the room. I need people to see me. Sometimes, like on that plane, the real world is ugly. It's prejudiced and unfair. But at least it's real. At least the person they're judging is me, not the idea of my father's money." Lawrence was silent. For a long, profound moment, he said nothing. He had spent a lifetime conquering boardrooms, outmaneuvering rivals, and building an empire from sheer force of will. He understood numbers, risk, and power. But here, by a lake, his own son was explaining a world of subtle pains and invisible cages that he had never fully comprehended. He had seen the incident as an attack to be avenged, a problem to be solved with money and power. He hadn't seen it as a symptom of the very world he had tried and failed to shield his son from. "You are stronger than I ever was at your age," Lawrence said at last, his voice thick with a raw, unfamiliar emotion. The words felt heavy, pulled from a place of deep revelation. "And you have shown me a rot in my own house, I've been sitting in my office on the 80th floor, looking at spreadsheets that represent thousands of employees, and I've forgotten that they are people. Ascend Air is more than an asset on a balance sheet. It's a culture, and I have failed. I have allowed this poison to fester. That conversation by the lake was not an end, but a beginning. The fire was rekindled in Lawrence Maxwell's eyes, but it was no longer just the fire of a vengeful father. It was the focused, cold-burning fire of a builder who had discovered a fatal flaw in his foundation. He wasn't just going to patch the crack. He was going to tear the whole thing down and rebuild it on bedrock. The next morning, he made a call to David Chen. "Cancel my schedule for the next quarter," he commanded. "We're starting a new project. It's called the Maxwell Initiative. Our first target is Ascend Air." The initiative was Lawrence Maxwell's corporate blitzkrieg. He personally diverted $50 million of his own fortune to fund it, a sum that made the entire industry's collective jaws drop. He then sought out the most respected and most feared DEI expert in the country, Dr. Anika Sharma, a sharp, uncompromising academic and activist who had a reputation for shredding corporate hypocrisy. Dr. Sharma was skeptical at their first meeting. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, her arms crossed, "I don't do window dressing. I'm not here to help you write a pretty press release so you can feel better." "Dr. Sharma," Lawrence replied, leaning forward, his intensity filling the cavernous office, "I am not interested in a press release. I'm interested in a cultural exorcism. You will have unlimited budget, unconditional access to every employee from the baggage handlers to the board of directors, and the absolute authority to recommend and implement any change you see fit. Your findings will be my commands. I want you to burn out the rot. Is that clear enough?" She saw in his eyes not the calculated charm of a PR-conscious CEO, but the zealous conviction of a convert. She accepted. What followed was a revolution. The old, condescending training videos were replaced with an immersive, mandatory program built around hyper-realistic VR scenarios. New flight attendants didn't just listen to lectures, they were placed in a virtual cabin and had to face the digital ghost of Chad Peterson, the judgmental glare of Karen Miller, and the quiet dignity of a boy who looked just like Royce. They had to make choices in real time and face the immediate, branching consequences of their biases. The hiring process was torn apart and rebuilt. A new, independent, passenger advocacy office was created, a department with the power to investigate any complaint and whose findings were delivered, unedited, directly to Lawrence's desk. It was an unprecedented system of accountability. Royce, initially reluctant to be the poster boy for the initiative, found he couldn't stay on the sidelines. His father asked him to chair a new youth advisory council, a group of young, frequent flyers from diverse backgrounds who would review the new policies. At the first meeting, when a slick marketing executive presented a watered-down, corporate-friendly version of the new training, Royce spoke up. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm, stopping the presentation cold. "It has to be uglier than that. It has to feel real. You need to show the passengers humiliation. You need to make the employee feel the shame of being wrong. Don't soften it. Don't make it comfortable." His raw honesty set the tone for the entire initiative. He also took personal charge of the foundation funded by Chad Peterson's massive settlement. He named it the Second Look Foundation and began working with its legal team, reading the cases of young people who had been wronged by snap judgments. He met a teenage girl who was expelled for having ibuprofen in her backpack because school officials assumed she was a dealer. He met a boy who was arrested for loitering while waiting for his mother to get off her shift as a cleaner. In their stories, he saw the echo of his own, and his purpose solidified. The legend of Flight 715 became an industry fable, a modern-day epic of corporate karma. The changes at Ascend Air were seismic, creating ripples that forced other airlines to re-examine their own cultures. 2 years later, Ascend Air's customer satisfaction and employee morale scores were the highest in the industry. The Maxwell Initiative became a Harvard Business School case study on how to turn a corporate crisis into a profound and profitable transformation. The humiliation Royce Maxwell suffered at 30,000 feet, a moment of intense personal pain, had become an inflection point, not just for a company, but for a father and a son. It had taught a powerful man the limits of his protection, and had shown a young man the true meaning of his own strength, proving that the deepest change often begins not with a shout, but with the quiet, unwavering demand to be seen for who you truly are. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a mistaken accusation over a pair of headphones. It was a story about the hidden biases that shape our snap judgments and the catastrophic consequences they can have. It's a testament to the fact that true power isn't about yelling the loudest, but about having the strength to remain calm in the face of injustice, knowing that accountability will come. Royce Maxwell's ordeal on Flight 715 became a catalyst, transforming a moment of personal humiliation into a movement of systemic change that reformed an entire corporation. It's a harsh but necessary reminder that character is not defined by wealth or status, but by how we treat those we believe have nothing to offer us. If this story resonated with you, and you believe that accountability matters, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever witnessed an abuse of authority, big or small, and what happened? Let's talk about it. Thank you for listening. What happens when the people you trust with your life at 35,000 feet decide you aren't worthy of respect? A black couple sits in an exclusive airport lounge, quietly minding their own business. When the flight crew for their plane arrives, the couple becomes the target of cruel jokes and racist whispers. The crew laughs, believing the couple doesn't belong. They have no idea that the two people they are mocking are not just passengers. They are the high-level FAA inspectors assigned to audit their flight today. And they are watching everything. The Horizon Club at New York's JFK International Airport was a cathedral of manufactured calm. Tucked away in Terminal 4, it was a world of brushed steel, hushed conversations, and the clinking of expensive glassware. It was 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the lounge was filling with the evening rush of transatlantic travelers, bankers in rumpled suits, tech bros in expensive hoodies, and families enjoying the last moments of a first-class vacation. In a quiet corner, near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the rainy tarmac, sat Marcus Washington and Amara Thorne. To the casual observer, They were just another well-dressed couple. Marcus, in his late 40s, wore dark jeans, a crisp white shirt, and a tailored navy blazer. He had an air of stillness about him, the kind of deep, observant calm that comes from a life of high-stakes work. He nursed a black coffee, his eyes methodically scanning the room. Amara, a decade younger, was electric where he was grounded. She wore a simple black turtleneck and slacks, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. She was scrolling through a document on her phone, but her attention wasn't really on the screen. She was listening. They were not on vacation. They were not new money. They were, in fact, two of the most senior safety inspectors for the Federal Aviation Administration's White Glove Audit Program. Marcus was ex-Air Force, a specialist in avionics and flight operations. Amara was a leading expert in human factors, the psychology of cabin safety, crew resource management, and emergency response. Their job was to blend in. They flew unannounced as full-fare passengers to observe airlines in their natural, unguarded state. They weren't there to check if the seatbelts clicked. They were there to see if the entire system of safety was sound. And tonight, their target was Global Vista Air, Flight 719, non-stop from JFK to London Heathrow. The heavy glass door of the lounge hissed open, and the atmosphere shifted. In walked the crew for Flight 719. They weren't in uniform yet, but they wore their status like one. Leading them was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, with bleached blonde hair and a palpable air of entitlement. This was Brenda Jennings, the lead flight attendant, a 25-year veteran who saw the cabin as her personal kingdom. Behind her was First Officer Chad Larson, young, arrogant, with a pilot's chronograph on his wrist that he made sure everyone saw. He was laughing loudly at something on his phone. Flanking them were two junior flight attendants, Sarah and Tom, who looked nervous and eager to please. The crew claimed a large circular booth in the center of the lounge, tossing their rollerboards down with a proprietary clatter. They were loud, a stark violation of the lounge's unwritten rules. Marcus and Amara, trained to be invisible, became more so. They were just two more faces in the crowd. Brenda leaned back, kicking her feet up onto the opposite seat. "I swear," she announced, "if one more person asks me for a gluten-free, soy-free, nut-free meal, I'm going to scream. Just eat the chicken, people." Chad chuckled. "At least you get the chicken. Miller," he meant Captain Miller, the flight's commander, "is probably already halfway through his pre-flight nap. Guy doesn't care what we do as long as we push back on time." Amara's fingers tensed on her phone. She and Marcus shared a look. Crew resource management failing. A first officer publicly disparaging his captain was a massive red flag. It spoke to a breakdown in cockpit discipline. Brenda flagged down a waitress, snapping her fingers. "Another round, and make mine a double. This London run is a bore." Her eyes swept the room, dismissive and sharp. They landed on Marcus and Amara. Marcus was reading The Economist. Amara was sipping her water. Brenda stared for a moment too long. She leaned in toward Chad, her voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "Ugh, look at that," she muttered, gesturing with her chin. Since when did they start letting just anyone in the Horizon Club? Must have gotten a one-day pass with a new credit card. Chad looked over. He smirked. "Seriously, they look like they're heading for coach. Probably just here for the free snacks before they get shuffled back to row 40. The junior flight attendant, Sarah, glanced over and looked away quickly, her cheeks coloring. Tom, the other junior, offered a weak, sycophantic laugh. Marcus slowly turned a page in his magazine. He didn't look up. Amara took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. Their professional training was absolute. Do not engage. Observe. Document. But this was different. This wasn't just unprofessional. It was personal. Brenda, emboldened by their lack of reaction, pushed further. She was bored and looking for sport. "I bet they're on our flight," she said, louder this time. "They're probably the ones who pre-ordered the vegan meal and will complain about it. I can just tell. Probably trying to get a free upgrade by complaining," Chad added, checking his reflection in his phone. "It's always the ones who look like that who try the hardest." Marcus closed his magazine. He placed it neatly on the table. Amara set her phone down, screen down. They didn't look at the crew. They looked at each other. The audit, Marcus knew, had just taken on a new, critical dimension. When a crew is sloppy with their professionalism in public, they are almost certainly sloppy with their safety duties in private. But now, Amara's human factors specialty was at the forefront. What happens when a crew's personal prejudice, their overt, blatant racism, is introduced into a high-stress environment? It was a question they taught in textbooks. Tonight, it looked like they were about to see the answer in real time. "Let's get another coffee, Amara," Marcus said, his voice perfectly level. "It's going to be a long flight." As they stood, they had to walk past the crew's booth. Marcus walked first. Amara followed. As she passed, Brenda Jennings, in a moment of juvenile, calculated spite, stuck her designer shoe out slightly. Amara, focused and professional, didn't see it. She clipped her foot on Brenda's heel, stumbling forward and catching herself on the back of a chair. The crew, all except Sarah, burst into laughter. "Oh my goodness!" Brenda fake gasped, her eyes wide with mock innocence. "Watch your step, honey. These expensive floors are... well, they can be tricky for some people." Amara stood up straight. Her eyes were like polished steel. She looked directly at Brenda, who was still smirking. The entire lounge section had gone quiet, all eyes on the confrontation. Marcus turned, his face unreadable. He offered his hand to Amara. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Marcus." Chad leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Hey folks, no hard feelings. You'd better hurry though. I think I just heard the final boarding call for Atlanta. You know, on that other airline." He winked. The implication was clear. You don't belong here. You belong on a budget carrier. Marcus met Chad's gaze. He held it for 3 full seconds. He said nothing. The silence was heavier than any shout. Then he and Amara turned and walked, with perfect unhurried posture, towards the coffee bar. "God," Chad scoffed, his voice returning to its normal volume. "So entitled. Can't even take a joke." Brenda watched them go, her lip curled in a sneer. "Well, that's the last we'll see of them. Let's finish up. Time to go to work." In the corner, Marcus handed Amara a fresh bottle of water. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm documenting," Amara said, her voice tight. "Brenda Jennings, lead FA. Chad Larson, first officer. Hostile, discriminatory, and unprofessional conduct. Created a trip hazard. Publicly disparaged passengers." "Good," Marcus said, taking a sip of his coffee. "This audit is now code red. We're not just watching for procedure. We're watching for malice." "They think we're a joke," Amara said, her anger a cold, hard knot in her stomach. "Yes, they do," Marcus replied, looking out the window as a Global Vista 787 Dreamliner taxied toward the gate. "And that's exactly why they are going to fail." The boarding call for Global Vista, Flight 719 to London Heathrow, echoed through the terminal. The crew, now in their crisp, navy blue uniforms, strode past the gate, Brenda leading the way. They disappeared down the jet bridge, ready to assume their roles. A few minutes later, the gate agent called for first-class boarding. Marcus and Amara stood. They gathered their carry-on bags, standard-issue rollers that held their clothes on one side and their inspection equipment and secure laptops on the other. They walked past the crew's empty, messy booth in the lounge and headed to the gate. "Mr. Washington? Ms. Thorne?" The gate agent, a polite young man named David, smiled brightly. "Right this way. We'll get you settled in." He scanned their boarding passes. Beep, beep. "Enjoy your flight, sir, ma'am. You're in 1A and 1B, right at the front." Marcus and Amara stepped onto the jet bridge. As they rounded the corner into the aircraft's galley, they were met by the crew. Brenda Jennings was standing there, holding a tray of pre-departure drinks, champagne and orange juice, with a plastic, welcoming smile plastered on her face. It was the mask of service Amara had written a paper on. When Brenda saw who was walking in, the same two people from the lounge, her smile didn't just fade, it inverted. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a wave of visible anger. Chad Larson, standing in the cockpit doorway, saw them. He choked on a sip of water, his face turning red. Marcus simply looked at Brenda. "Good evening." Amara followed. "Good evening." Brenda was so stunned she couldn't speak. She just stood there, her mouth slightly open, blocking the aisle. The passengers behind Marcus and Amara were starting to bunch up. "Ma'am," Marcus said gently, "may we get to our seats?" Brenda's face snapped back to its default sneer. She thought, in that split second, they must be bloggers, or they scammed their way in. They bought a cheap upgrade and think they're royalty. She stepped aside, her movement rigid, and retracted the tray of drinks as Amara passed. "Right this way," she said, her voice dripping with ice. Marcus and Amara settled into 1A and 1B, the bulkhead throne seats, the most desirable on the plane. They stowed their bags, the picture of practiced, efficient travelers. Brenda watched them, her mind racing. This was her cabin. She would not let these people ruin her flight. She turned to the junior FA, Tom. "You handle this row," she hissed, quiet enough for only him to hear. "I don't want to deal with them. And don't go out of your way. You understand me?" Tom, young and impressionable, nodded quickly. "Yes, Brenda." The boarding process continued. Marcus and Amara began their silent, secondary audit. From his seat, Marcus had a clear view of the forward galley and the cockpit door. Amara, from hers, could observe the main cabin door and the flight attendant station. Amara pulled out a slim, black, hard-bound notebook. It looked like a personal journal. To the crew, it might look like she was a writer or just a fussy passenger. Brenda, walking by, saw it and rolled her eyes. "Probably writing a complaint already," she muttered to Chad, who was now seated in the cockpit. "Let her. It'll go straight in the trash." But in that notebook, Amara was making notes in a coded shorthand she and Marcus had developed. 1845. L1 door. Lead FA, Jennings, failed to check emergency assist strap. 1847. FRWD galley. FA, Tom, did not physically verify seals on medkit box. Watched Jennings pencil whip the checklist. Marcus was making his own mental notes. The cockpit door was open. Captain Miller and First Officer Larson were having a loud, non-essential conversation. He could hear Chad laughing about a football game. This was a violation of the sterile cockpit principle, which was supposed to be in effect during all ground operations. They weren't focused on pre-flight. Brenda, deciding to reassert her dominance, took over the first-class pre-departure service herself, pointedly skipping Marcus and Amara. She offered drinks to the passenger in 1D, then 2A, then 2B, walking past them twice without a word. Finally, Marcus used the call button. It chimed. Brenda ignored it. It chimed again. With a dramatic put-upon sigh, she stomped over. "Yes," she snapped. "Good evening," Marcus said, his voice as smooth as glass. My partner and I would love a pre-departure drink. Water would be fine. Brenda's smile was pure acid. We are so sorry. We've already collected the glassware for departure. We're just too busy. You'll have to wait until we're in the air. This was a blatant lie. She was holding a tray with 2 fresh glasses of champagne. I see, Marcus said. He looked at the tray. He looked back at her. Very well. He pressed the call button again. This time, the junior FA, Sarah, ran over, her face pale. Yes, sir. Can I help you? Yes, Amara said, giving the young woman a small, kind smile. My colleague and I would just like 2 bottles of water. Please, when you have a moment. Sarah, not yet poisoned by Brenda's toxicity, just saw 2 passengers. Of course, right away. She dashed to the galley. Brenda grabbed her by the arm. What did I tell you? I handle them, and they can wait. But they just wanted water, Sarah stammered. And I said they can wait. Before Sarah could respond, Amara was standing in the galley entrance. She was not supposed to be up, but she did it anyway. Excuse me, Amara said. Is there a problem? Brenda whirled around, her face a mask of fury. Ma'am, you must return to your seat. The main cabin door is about to close. You are a safety hazard. I am currently a passenger in your care, Ms. Jennings, Amara said, her voice low and sharp. And your conduct, from the lounge to this moment, has been noted. We asked for water. Is that going to be a problem for you to provide? The entire galley went silent. Chad, who had poked his head out of the cockpit again, watched with a smirk. He loved when Brenda put problem passengers in their place. Brenda, realizing she was being challenged, went for the kill. She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. I don't know who you think you are. You waltz in here, flashing a first-class ticket you probably got from some diversity lottery, and think you own the plane. This is my aircraft. You will sit down, you will shut up, and I will bring you your water when I am good and ready. Or I can have you and your friend removed from this flight right now for interfering with a flight crew. Your choice. It was the nuclear option, a direct threat. Amara held her gaze. The mask was completely off. This was no longer just prejudice. It was abuse of power. I see, Amara said, her voice deathly quiet. Thank you for clarifying your position, Ms. Jennings. She turned, returned to her seat, and buckled in. Marcus looked at her. Code red? Code black, Amara replied, clicking her pen. She just threatened a federal officer. She just doesn't know it yet. The door closed. The safety video began to play. Brenda, fuming, performed the safety demonstration with all the enthusiasm of a coroner. When she came to the part about passengers who may need assistance, she stared directly at Marcus and Amara. The plane pushed back from the gate. The 787 Dreamliner tore a hole in the night sky, climbing past the turbulence of the lower atmosphere into the smooth, cold dark of 36,000 feet. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. In the cabin, the performative dance of service began. In the front galley, however, the performance was over. I cannot believe them, Brenda seethed, ripping open a bag of almonds. In my cabin. The nerve. Just ignore them. Chad's voice crackled over the intercom from the cockpit. He was on the private crew channel. Give them 0 service. Who are they going to complain to? Us? Miller's already asleep. He's asleep, Brenda said, shocked. We're not even at cruise. He's old. Told me to wake him over Greenland. Anyway, have fun. Don't let those 2 bother you. In her notebook, Amara wrote, 19:30 UTC, Captain or Miller sleeping post-climb, F.O. Larson encouraging service non-compliance, gross CRM failure. This was bad, very, very bad. The captain was the ultimate authority, and he had already abdicated it to a toxic lead FA and an arrogant first officer. The meal service began. Brenda herself, with a smile that was all teeth, came to their row. "And for you too?" she asked, not even looking at them. "We have the beef short rib, the seared halibut, or the pasta." "I'll have the halibut," Amara said. "And I'll have the short rib," Marcus added. Brenda said, tapping her tablet. "Oh, that is such a shame. It seems we're all out of both. We only have the vegan pasta left. I'm sure you'll love it." She knew what she was doing. It was a callback to her comment in the lounge. "I bet they're the ones who pre-ordered the vegan meal." Marcus didn't blink. "The pasta will be fine, thank you." "And for you?" she said to Amara. "The pasta is fine," Amara said, her eyes boring into Brenda's. "Wonderful." Brenda beamed and walked away. 10 minutes later, Tom brought their trays. The passengers around them, in 1D, 2A, 2D, were all eating the short rib and the halibut. The shortage was a targeted lie. The pasta was cold, congealed, barely edible. Marcus and Amara each ate one bite for posterity. Then they put their forks down. They didn't complain. They didn't ask for something else. They simply observed. This was the human factors test in action. Brenda, so consumed by her petty, racist vendetta, was failing to see the bigger picture. She was so focused on punishing them that she was becoming sloppy. Marcus watched as she and Tom cleared the service. A passenger in 2D, a businessman, asked for a second glass of wine. "Certainly, sir," Brenda cooed, refilling his glass to the brim. She did the same for the woman in 2A and the man in 3D. But then she didn't stop. She left the half-empty bottle of red wine on the man's armrest. "Just in case you need a top-up, sweetie," she purred. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. This wasn't just bad service. It was a major FAA violation. A large, unsecured glass bottle in the cabin? In even moderate turbulence, that bottle would become a projectile. It was a missile. Amara, seeing it from her angle, made another note. 2015 UTC. Led F.A. Jennings. Left 750ml glass bottle unsecured on passenger armrest. Violation 14. CFR 121.5577. They were compiling a case so airtight that no union representative, no airline lawyer, could possibly argue it, and the crew was handing it to them on a silver platter. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers were asleep or watching movies. This was when the real work often began. Marcus unbuckled. He stood up, stretched, and began a slow walk back toward the economy cabin. This was part of the audit. He needed to check the mid and aft galleys, observe the rest of the crew, and check the emergency exits. As he passed the forward galley, Brenda and Tom were inside, curtains drawn. He heard Brenda's voice. "And that's why you always check the departure box, even if you don't. It's just paperwork. Nobody ever looks. It saves 10 minutes. Marcus paused. He was stretching. He heard Tom. "But what about the emergency light check?" "Oh, please, does it matter? If we crash, we crash. A little light isn't going to help. Just check the box. Now go, I want to rest." Marcus's blood ran cold. This was not just laziness. This was willful, systemic negligence. He continued his walk. Amara, meanwhile, unbuckled and went to the forward lavatory. On her way, she accidentally brushed against the forward jump seat, where the junior FA Sarah was sitting, reading a magazine. "Oh, excuse me," Amara said. No, you're fine," Sarah said, looking up. She seemed nervous. "Long flight," Amara said, offering a small smile. "The longest," Sarah agreed, sighing. "Is it always like this?" Amara asked, her voice quiet, conspiratorial. Sarah's eyes flickered toward the galley curtain, where Brenda was. "Like what? So tense?" Sarah's face crumpled for a second. She's an icon, a legend, but she's tough. She doesn't like surprises or new people. I see, Amara said. Well, you seem to be doing a great job. Thanks, Sarah whispered. Honestly, I'm really sorry about before, in the lounge, and with the water. That wasn't right. There it is, Amara thought. The dissenter. In every failed crew, there was almost always one person who knew things were wrong. We all have a job to do, Sarah, Amara said, her voice kind but firm. The most important thing is to do it right, no matter who is watching. She went into the lavatory. It was clean, but she did a quick, practiced check. She pulled on the assist bar, she checked under the sink, and she checked the smoke detector. It was stuffed with a damp paper towel. A passenger, or more likely, a crew member, had disabled it so they could smoke a cigarette or a vape. Amara took a picture with her phone. This was a federal crime. She came out, her face a mask of stone. She returned to her seat just as Marcus was returning from his walk. They made eye contact. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It's bad back there, too. She nodded grimly. It's worse up here. They were over the black, icy waters of the North Atlantic. There was no one to turn to. They were in a pressurized tube, flying at 600 miles per hour, under the command of a crew that was discriminatory, negligent, and, as Amara had just discovered, potentially criminal. The hard karma they were here to deliver was no longer about punishing racism. It was about saving the lives of the 200 other people on the plane. The flight droned on. Marcus and Amara tried to get some rest, but they were too wired. They were auditors on a live fire exercise. Every creak of the fuselage, every chime of the call bell, set them on edge. The first sign of trouble was subtle. A smell. Amara, with her human factors training, was acutely sensitive to environmental changes. It was a faint, acrid smell, like burning plastic. She sat up. She looked at Marcus. He smelled it too. It was coming from the galley. At that exact moment, the call bell chimed from the economy cabin. It wasn't just one chime. It was the triple chime, the emergency call. Brenda, who had been dozing on her jump seat, startled awake. She looked annoyed. Now what? She muttered. The intercom crackled. It was Sarah from the aft galley. Her voice was high-pitched, panicked. Brenda, we have a passenger. Mrs. Petrov in 32C. She can't breathe. I think it's an allergy. Her son said she ate some of the cashews. She's allergic to nuts. It was a nut-free flight, Brenda snapped into the phone. She said she brought her own snack, and it must have been cross-contaminated. Brenda, it's bad. Her face is swelling. This was a grade A medical emergency. Brenda sighed, a sound of profound inconvenience. Ugh, fine. I'll get the kit. She unbuckled and went into the galley. Amara watched her. Brenda fumbled with the latch on the main medical kit box. She pulled on it, but it wouldn't open. It was the new model, the one she'd pencil-whipped the check on. She clearly didn't know how to open it. Stupid. Cheap. Box, she hissed, smacking it. Ma'am, Amara said, unbuckling. Do you need help? I told you to sit down, Brenda shrieked. This is a crew matter. She's in anaphylaxis, Amara said, her voice rising, shedding all pretense of being a passenger. She has maybe 3 minutes. Where is the EpiPen? It's in the kit. There's a secondary fast response kit with an EpiPen in the jump seat compartment. It's regulation, Amara said. Brenda just stared at her blankly. What? No, there isn't. It's in the box. Amara pushed past her. Move. She ran to the jump seat, opened the compartment under it, and pulled out a small red pouch. Inside, 2 EpiPens aspirin, and basic first aid. Just as she pulled it out, the plane lurched. It wasn't turbulence. It was a single, violent jolt that threw Amara against the bulkhead. The acrid smell of burning plastic intensified, and a thin wisp of smoke curled out from under the galley floor. An alarm, a high-pitched beep, started to sound. It was the galley fire detector. Brenda screamed, a real, terrified scream. In the cockpit, Chad, who had been bored, suddenly sat bolt upright. What was that? The beep, beep, beep was now audible. A red light flashed on their panel. FWD galley smoke. Fire! Chad yelled. Captain, wake up! Fire! Captain Miller shot up from his reclined seat, disoriented. What? Where? In the cabin, chaos erupted. The jolt had sent the unsecured wine bottle from row 3 flying. It shattered against the bulkhead, spraying glass and red wine everywhere. Passengers were waking up, yelling. Brenda was frozen, paralyzed by the smoke, the alarm, and the screaming passengers. She was, in FAA terms, non-mission capable. Amara looked at the wisp of smoke. It was an electrical fire. Brenda! Amara yelled, grabbing her shoulders. Get the BCF, the extinguisher, now! Brenda just stared, her eyes wide with panic. Marcus was already out of his seat. Amara, the passenger! I'll handle the fire! He grabbed the small BCF extinguisher from its holder, the one he'd mentally noted the location of hours ago. He knelt, pulled the pin, and aimed it at the source of the smoke, a small electrical panel for the water heater. He discharged a short, controlled burst. Amara, meanwhile, was running. She sprinted down the aisle, EpiPen in hand, toward row 32. Out of my way! She yelled. Move! Passengers, seeing the authority in her face, flattened themselves against their seats. She got to 32C. Mrs. Petrov was blue. Her eyes were rolled back. Her son was sobbing. Mom, Mom, please! Is this her? Amara yelled. Yes, she's allergic. I don't know. I've got this, Amara said. She ripped the cap off the EpiPen. I'm trained. I'm going to inject her in the thigh. Hold her. She jabbed the pen hard into the woman's leg, holding it for the required 5 seconds. Back in the forward galley, the cockpit door flew open. First Officer Chad Larson stumbled out, his eyes wild. What's going on? I see smoke. Is it a fire? He had just committed the single most dangerous violation a pilot can make. He had abandoned the cockpit during an active, unfolding emergency, leaving a disoriented, just woken up captain alone at the controls. He had broken the fortress of the flight deck. Marcus, having just discharged the extinguisher, stood up. The smoke was already dissipating. It was a small short, likely in the water heater wiring. He looked at Chad. His voice was no longer that of a passenger. It was the voice of a federal inspector who had just witnessed the ultimate sin. First Officer Larson, Marcus said, his voice resin running like a steel bar. You just abandoned the flight deck. You violated Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 121 or Article 4 for 542. You will return to the cockpit immediately. You will secure that door, and you will not come out again until we are on the ground. Do you understand me? Chad froze. All the arrogance, all the smirking, evaporated. He was looking at a man who had just quoted federal law from memory. Who the hell are you? Chad stammered. I am the last man on this aircraft you wanted to see tonight, Marcus said. Now, get back in the cockpit. Chad, his face ashen, scrambled back into the cockpit and slammed the door. Brenda, who had witnessed the entire exchange, was hyperventilating. She was leaning against the galley wall, her entire career flashing before her eyes. She looked at Marcus, then at the fire extinguisher in his hand, then at the broken wine bottle on the floor. She had failed, on every conceivable level. Just then, Amara came walking back up the aisle. She looked calm. "Medical emergency is stable," she reported to Marcus, as if he were her partner, which he was. "EpiPen administered. Passenger is conscious and breathing. Vitals are improving. I've instructed the aft crew to monitor her and prepare for a medical meet on arrival." She then looked at Brenda. "I also found this," she said, holding up the damp paper towel from the lavatory. "Disabled smoke detector. A federal offense." Brenda Jennings slid down the galley wall and sat on the floor, her face in her hands. The hard karma wasn't something that was coming. It was here. It had just saved 200 lives. The remaining 3 hours of the flight were the quietest, most terrifying hours of Brenda Jennings's life. The plane was fine. The small electrical fire was out. The passenger, Mrs. Petroff, was stable. The real emergency was the one unfolding in the minds of the crew. After Chad had scrambled back into the cockpit, a new voice came over the intercom. Captain Miller. He was awake now, and he sounded furious. "This is the captain," he announced, his voice tight with anger. "We experienced a minor electrical short in the forward galley, which has been resolved. We also had a medical situation, which has been handled. We are continuing to London Heathrow with no further issues. Flight attendants, secure the forward galley and report." Marcus, still standing, looked at Brenda, who was still on the floor. "Get up, Miss Jennings," Marcus said, his voice flat. "He's talking to you." Brenda, on trembling legs, stood. I clean up this glass," Marcus ordered, pointing to the shattered wine bottle. "And secure your galley. We are still in flight." Tom and Sarah, who had heard the commotion, ran up. They saw Brenda's face, the extinguisher residue, and Marcus, who was now radiating an authority they couldn't place but couldn't deny. "Tom, Sarah," Marcus said, "get a dustpan and a blanket for the glass. Now." They jumped, as if he were their training supervisor. Brenda, humiliated, just watched as the junior crew she'd bullied all night cleaned up her mess. Amara sat back in 1B. She opened her notebook. She was no longer hiding it. She wrote in clear, concise script a full after-action report of the entire incident. 2210 UTC, FW galley smoke detector activation. 2210 UTC, simultaneous L3 call bell, anaphylaxis event. 2211 UTC, lead FA, Jennings, failed to locate deploy medkit. Passenger, Thorne, retrieved secondary kit. 2212 UTC, electrical fire, FWD galley. Lead FA, Jennings froze, non-mission capable. 22.12 UTC, passenger Washington, retrieved, discharged BCF, extinguishing fire. 22.13 UTC, first officer, Larson, abandoned flight deck, violating sterile cockpit. 22:13 UTC, passenger Washington, ordered FO to return to duty. 22:14 UTC, passenger Thorne, administered EpiPen, stabilized medical emergency. Summary: total breakdown of CRM. Lead FA failure. FO failure. Safety procedures performed by passengers. It was the most damning report she had ever written. The rest of the flight, Brenda, Tom, and Sarah did not return to the first-class cabin. They hid in the galley, the curtain drawn. The only person who moved was Marcus, who went back to check on Mrs. Petroff himself, introducing himself as a concerned passenger and ensuring she was comfortable. As the coast of Ireland appeared on the moving map, signaling their approach, Amara looked over at Marcus. "The lounge," she said quietly. "It wasn't just them being racist, Marcus. It was a symptom. It always is," he replied. "The arrogance it takes to mock a stranger in public is the same arrogance it takes to pencil whip a safety check. The entitlement to believe you belong and they don't is the same entitlement that makes you think the rules don't apply to you." "She thought we were nothing," Amara said, flexing her hands, the adrenaline finally fading. And because she thought we were nothing, she got sloppy. She got distracted. She wasn't focused on her job. She was focused on us. That, Marcus said, is the very definition of a human factors failure, and it's going to be the centerpiece of our report. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed for the final descent. Brenda Jennings had to emerge. It was the law. She had to sit in her jump seat for landing. She walked out of the galley, her face a pale, waxy mask. She wouldn't make eye contact with Marcus or Amara. She strapped herself into the jump seat, facing them, her eyes fixed on a spot on the bulkhead. She looked like a woman on her way to her own execution. The plane touched down at London Heathrow with a gentle bump. As it taxied to the gate, a flurry of activity happened outside. "Look," Marcus said, motioning out the window. There wasn't just a jet bridge. There were 2 sets of medical paramedics, a fire crew, standard for any in-flight fire report, and most tellingly, 3 stern-looking officials in suits. "They're here," Amara said. Captain Miller, having been informed by Chad of the full, horrifying picture, had clearly radioed ahead and reported passenger interference, trying to spin the story. He had inadvertently called his own executioners. The plane stopped. The thunk of the jet bridge connecting sounded. The fasten seatbelt sign went off. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brenda said, her voice a recorded monotone, "welcome to London Heathrow. We ask that you remain seated until—" "Brenda!" Captain Miller's voice boomed from the cockpit. He threw the door open, his face purple with rage. He had decided on his strategy. Attack. "You two!" he roared, pointing at Marcus and Amara. "Do not move. I have alerted airport security. You are being detained for interfering with a flight crew, assaulting a flight attendant, and—" His voice trailed off, because Marcus and Amara had not reached for their bags. They had reached into their blazers. They stood up, blocking the aisle. Marcus held up his credentials. The gold badge, the official photo, the bold, unmistakable words, United States Government, Federal Aviation Administration, Safety Inspector, Marcus Washington. Amara did the same. Federal Aviation Administration, Cabin Safety Specialist, Amara Thorne. The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute. Every passenger who had been about to stand up froze. Captain Miller's face went from purple to red to a sickly, mottled white. His jaw dropped open. Brenda Jennings let out a small, strangled sound like a dying animal. Chad, peeking from behind Miller, looked like he was going to faint. "Captain Miller," Marcus said, his voice now a formal, official command. "My name is Senior Inspector Marcus Washington. This is Inspector Amara Thorne. We are on a white glove audit of your airline and this flight. As of this moment, 0630 Zulu. This aircraft is grounded. Your entire crew is to be detained pending a full investigation, which is already in progress." He looked at Brenda, who was shaking so hard the jump seat was rattling. "Ms. Jennings," Marcus continued, "we observed your conduct, and that of First Officer Larson in the JFK Horizon Club. We observed your racist, discriminatory, and hostile behavior. We observed your willful negligence during pre-flight checks. We observed your targeted service failures. We observed you leave an unsecured glass bottle in the cabin, which became a projectile. We observed your total failure to respond to a medical emergency and your paralysis during an in-flight fire." Amara stepped forward. "We also observed your junior crew disabling a lavatory smoke detector. We observed you create a hostile work environment, and we observed you threatening passengers who were, in fact, saving the lives you had endangered." She looked at Captain Miller. "And you, Captain? We noted your first officer's comments about your pre-flight nap. We noted his repeated, dangerous violations of the sterile cockpit rule. And we just noted you attempting to have 2 federal inspectors arrested for performing their duties. The main cabin door opened. The 3 officials in suits, 2 from the UK's Civil Aviation Authority and 1 from the FAA's London field office, stepped on. "Inspector Washington?" one of them said. "We're here, Jim," Marcus replied. "We have a lot to talk about." He turned back to the crew. He looked at Brenda, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a profound, cold disappointment. "You laughed at us, Miss Jennings," he said, his voice quiet. "You thought we didn't belong. Your prejudice made you blind, and because you were blind, you failed. This is the hard karma you've earned." The fallout was not a storm. It was a nuclear winter. The passengers were deplaned, except for Marcus, Amara, the entire flight crew, and the officials. The paramedics came on, stabilized Mrs. Petrov, and took her to a hospital. Her son, a man named Alex, wouldn't leave without shaking Amara's hand. I don't know who you are," he said, tears in his eyes. "But you saved my mother's life. Brenda, that flight attendant, she was going to let her die." "She's in good hands now," Amara said simply. After the passengers were gone, the aircraft became a crime scene. Captain Miller, Brenda Jennings, Chad Larson, Tom and Sarah were formally interviewed, interrogated, one by one, right there in the first-class cabin for the next 9 hours. Marcus and Amara led the questioning, with the CAA and FAA field officers observing. It was a systematic, brutal dismantling of their careers. Brenda's defense crumbled in seconds. When confronted with the lounge comments, she first denied them. "I would never." "We have 3 other passengers from the lounge who've already submitted statements," Amara said, lying. It was a classic interrogation bluff. Brenda's face cracked. It was a joke. It was just locker room talk. It didn't mean anything." "Did pencil whipping the medical kit checklist also mean nothing, Ms. Jennings?" Marcus asked, his voice cutting. "Did you know how to open it?" I was flustered. The alarm went off after Mrs. Petrov's son called. "You were flustered because you were confronted by a passenger, Ms. Thorne, who you had already threatened, and you didn't know your own equipment." "And the wine bottle? And the disabled smoke detector? And the trip hazard in the lounge?" Brenda finally broke. She dissolved into a sobbing, incoherent mess, begging for her job, for her pension. "I've given 25 years to this airline. You can't do this." "You gave 25 years," Amara said, her voice ice-cold. "And in one 6-hour flight, you demonstrated you learned nothing about your primary duty, safety. You were more concerned with putting us in our place than you were with running a safe cabin. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." Chad Larson's interrogation was even shorter. "Mr. Larson, why did you leave the flight deck?" "There was a fire. I was assessing the situation." "Your job is to fly the plane," Marcus said. "Your captain was disoriented. You abandoned your post. You left the aircraft without a fully functional pilot in command during an active fire over the ocean. There is no excuse. There is no explanation. It is the single greatest act of professional malpractice a pilot can commit." When confronted with the lounge comments, Chad just shut down. No comment. "It doesn't matter," Marcus said. "We have your cockpit voice recorder logs. We have your intercom calls. We have your entire flight." Captain Miller, for his part, tried to blame his crew. "I had no idea. Brenda is a senior FA. Chad is a good pilot. I trusted them." "That was your mistake," Marcus countered. "Your job isn't to trust. It's to lead. It's called crew resource management. Your resource management failed. You fostered a culture where a first officer could mock you, where a lead FA could run a campaign of harassment, and where safety checks were optional. The entire system failure on this flight rests, ultimately, with you. By 5:00 p.m. London time, the initial report was filed. The crew was not allowed to check into their hotel. Their company IDs and passports were temporarily seized. They were flown back to New York, in coach, on a different airline, escorted by an FAA official, the next day. They were, in a word, finished. The hard karma came swiftly, and it was devastatingly precise. Brenda Jennings, fired for cause by Global Vista Air before she even landed in New York. The FAA initiated proceedings to permanently revoke her flight attendant certification. The charge sheet included reckless endangerment, gross negligence of safety duties, failure to perform in an emergency, falsifying federal documents, the pre-flight checklist, and conduct unbecoming. She was blacklisted from every major airline in the world. Her 25-year career was over. Her pension was gone. She was last heard of applying for a job at a Starbucks in suburban New Jersey. First Officer Chad Larson, fired immediately. The FAA permanently revoked his commercial pilot's license. The abandoning the flight deck charge was something from which there is no recovery. He would never legally pilot a commercial aircraft again. His arrogance cost him his entire future. Captain Miller. He was offered a choice: be fired for cause or take immediate, forced retirement. He took the retirement. He lost his seniority, his captain status, and all his flight benefits. He left the airline in disgrace, a case study in failed leadership. Tom and Sarah, the junior FAs. This is where Marcus and Amara showed the difference between justice and vengeance. Tom, who had laughed along with Brenda, was suspended for 6 months without pay and forced to retrain from scratch. Sarah, who had shown remorse and had not participated, was given a formal warning and mandatory retraining, but she kept her job. She later provided a key statement against Brenda. Global Vista Air. The airline itself was hit with the largest fine in its history, $2.2 million for systemic safety failures, training gaps, and a documented culture of non-compliance. Marcus and Amara's report, citing the racism in the lounge as the initial domino in a cascade of human factors failure, forced the airline to ground its entire 787 fleet for a week for emergency equipment audits. The stock price tanked, and the CEO was forced to issue a public apology. But the final, hardest piece of karma came from an unexpected place. Mrs. Petrov, the woman Amara had saved, made a full recovery. Her son, Alex Petrov, was not just a concerned son. He was a Pulitzer Prize-nominated investigative journalist for the New York Times. 2 weeks later, a front-page story ran, "Toxic Skies: How Prejudice at 35,000 feet Nearly Led to Tragedy." Alex, using his mother's eyewitness account and statements from other first-class passengers, laid out the entire story. The mockery in the lounge, the diversity lottery comments, the refusal of water, the cold pasta, the threats, and then the fire, the medical emergency, and the complete, terrifying failure of the crew. He concluded the article by revealing that the 2 passengers who had been the target of all this vitriol and who had single-handedly saved the plane were, in fact, FAA safety inspectors. The story was a global humiliation for Global Vista Air. Brenda Jennings and Chad Larson became the faces of racism and incompetence. Their names, their actions, their hard karma were now public record, a permanent monument to their own arrogance. Marcus and Amara, however, were not named. They were, as always, 2 inspectors, names withheld, who had already moved on to their next flight, their next audit, sitting quietly in a lounge, watching and listening. That is the power of hard karma. It's not always loud, and it's not always immediate. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just two people, sitting in a lounge, doing their job. The crew of Global Vista 719 thought they were all powerful. They thought their uniforms and their status gave them the right to judge, to mock, and to endanger people who they thought were less than them. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot that everyone has a job to do, and the most important job, the one we all share, is to treat each other with basic human dignity. Their prejudice wasn't just ugly, it was a distraction that made them fail at their own jobs, with life or death consequences. They didn't just get fired for their racism, they got fired because their racism proved they were unsafe. What do you think of this story? Have you ever seen someone in a position of power abuse it like this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in hard, real-life karma, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories.